Black female CEO forced out of VIP seat. One call freezes $1.20 B airline deal. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. GTOUTOFMYSEAT. The words didn't echo. They detonated. Every conversation inside the private VIP cabin collapsed at once. Crystal glasses paused midair. Leather seats creaked as heads turned. Even the low hum of the aircraft seemed to retreat, like it didn't want to be associated with what had just been said. He was standing now, tall, immaculate charcoal suit, silk tie knotted tight enough to signal control. His finger cut through the warm golden light of the cabin, pointed straight at her face like a verdict already decided. "That's my seat," he snapped again, louder this time. "Move. Now." She didn't. Nia Carter sat exactly as she had before the eruption, legs crossed, navy blazer tailored perfectly against her frame, one hand resting loosely around her phone. No flinch. No twitch. Just a slow lift of her eyes. Calm. The marble table between them held a slim leather portfolio and a discreet stack of escrow documents. To the untrained eye, it was just paperwork. To those who knew, it represented a pending $1.2 billion acquisition scheduled to finalize the moment this aircraft landed. But he didn't know. He saw a black woman sitting in 2A, and he decided she didn't belong. "This cabin is reserved for executive investors," he added, voice dripping with polished contempt. "You people always mix up sections." The phrase landed heavier than the first shout. A flight attendant near the galley froze. Another glanced at the manifest tablet in her hand, uncertainty flickering across her face. Nia tilted her head slightly. "Your name?" she asked, not to challenge him, just to register him. The man scoffed. "Richard Halston, primary stakeholder on this flight." Primary. The word hung there like perfume sprayed too thick. Behind him, a younger flight attendant shifted uncomfortably. She had scanned the boarding passes herself. She remembered the green check mark beside Nia's name. Executive clearance. But protocol often bends toward the loudest voice. And Richard Halston was very loud. "Ma'am," the senior attendant stepped forward, carefully tone rehearsed and brittle. There may have been a seating reassignment. There hadn't been. But the suggestion alone began its quiet work, reframing the scene. Casting doubt. Offering Halston a soft landing. Nia finally uncrossed her legs, not to stand, just to adjust. Her movements were deliberate, controlled. The kind of composure that doesn't come from confidence but from repetition. She'd seen this look before. Atlanta. Age 26. Denied entry to a founder's lounge despite owning more equity than half the room. Chicago. 32. Asked if she was staff at her own merger announcement. Different cities. Same tone. Back in the cabin, Richard leaned closer, lowering his voice as if proximity added legitimacy. "You're embarrassing yourself," he muttered. "Stand up before security does it for you." Security. The word rippled. A third passenger quietly raised his phone. The junior flight attendant swallowed. "Sir, her boarding pass did scan." Richard didn't turn around. "Then, scan it again." Silence folded over the cabin like a tightening net. Nia glanced down at her screen. One unread message from her assistant board ready. "Awaiting your signal." She locked the phone, looked back up at Richard, and for the first time a faint smile touched the corner of her mouth, not amused. Measured. "You're absolutely right," she said softly. "This seat is reserved for investors." A pause. Then, "And that's exactly why I'm sitting in it." The air changed. Not louder, heavier. And somewhere in a glass office tower 2,000 miles away, a legal team waited one phone call away from freezing $1 billion future. But for now, inside this golden cabin, all anyone could see was a man pointing, and a woman who refused to move. Richard Halston laughed. Not loud. Worse. Controlled. Dismissive. The kind of laugh that assumes the room will side with him before it even decides. "You're sitting there because someone made a mistake," he said, adjusting his cufflinks as if the matter were administrative. "And I'm giving you a chance to correct it gracefully." Gracefully. The word slid across the cabin like oil. Nia didn't respond immediately. She simply looked past him, not around him, past him, toward the flight attendant still holding the tablet. "Would you mind checking the manifest again?" she asked gently. The attendant hesitated. Richard's jaw tightened. "We've already established no," Nia said softly.
She didn't raise her voice.
But she interrupted him. And that shift, subtle, surgical, caused 3 nearby passengers to lean forward in their seats. The attendant glanced down at her screen.
Scrolled.
Paused. Her brow furrowed. There it was. 2A executive clearance. Nia Carter. Richard saw the pause and stepped closer, lowering his tone again. "Listen," he said, bending slightly so his shadow fell over her. "This isn't personal. These seats are tied to ownership, equity, actual leverage." His eyes moved slowly over her blazer, her heels, her hands. Not aspiration. The insult didn't need to be louder. It needed to be precise. Across the aisle, a middle-aged woman in pearls inhaled sharply. The junior attendant swallowed. "Sir, her ticket hasn't been reassigned." Richard didn't look at her. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his own platinum status card, flashing it briefly like a badge. "I've flown this route for 12 years, he said. "I know who belongs here." Belongs. There it was again. Nia uncrossed her legs fully now and placed both feet on the floor. Not to rise. To ground herself. "Mr. Halston," she said evenly, finally using his name.
How long have you been on the board? His expression flickered.
"Just slightly." "That's irrelevant." "Is it the cabin temperature seemed to drop 2 degrees? From the cockpit corridor, another crew member stepped closer, drawn by the tension. A murmur had begun low, unsettled. Richard straightened. "I don't answer to you." Nia tilted her head. "That's correct." A beat. "You don't."
Silence fell like a curtain.
The junior attendant's tablet chimed quietly, a system notification.
She glanced down instinctively.
Richard noticed. "What now?" he snapped. The attendant's eyes widened. There at the top of the manifest, a new flag had appeared beside 2A ownership tier, restricted override authority. She didn't fully understand what it meant. But she understood one thing. This wasn't a mistake. Richard saw her expression shift, saw doubt replace certainty, and for the first time since boarding, his confidence recalibrated. "Who exactly are you?" he demanded. Nia looked at him. Not with anger. Not with triumph. Just clarity. "I asked you the same question," she said quietly. And somewhere far above the runway, lights clearance for departure had been delayed. Not by weather. By power recalculating itself inside cabin 2A. Richard didn't like silence. Especially not the kind that formed when control slipped out of his hands. He stepped back, half a pace, eyes darting briefly to the tablet in the attendant's grip. "Restricted override," he repeated, scoffing. "That doesn't mean anything. Every executive manifest has internal codes." The senior flight attendant wasn't so sure anymore. She leaned toward her colleague.
Tap into the back end, she whispered.
"Check tier authority." The junior attendant hesitated, then tapped. The system spun. Richard folded his arms, performing patience now. "You're holding up departure," he said loudly enough for the cabin to hear. "All because someone doesn't know when they're out of their depth. A few passengers shifted uncomfortably, but not toward Nia. Toward him. Nia remained seated, hands resting calmly on her knees. Her phone buzzed once against the leather. She didn't look at it. Not yet. The junior attendant's screen refreshed. Her eyes widened. "Ma'am," she breathed, barely audible. Richard caught it. What she swallowed. Seat 2A is tied to. She stopped. Scrolled again. Looked up. Tied to acquisition authority. The phrase didn't sound like airline language. It sounded corporate. Richard's jaw tightened. Acquisition of what no one answered immediately. From the front of the cabin, the captain himself appeared, drawn by the delay. Crisp uniform. Measured expression. "What seems to be the issue?" he asked. Richard turned instantly. "Captain, this woman is claiming executive clearance for 2A. I believe there's been a manifest error." The captain looked to Nia. She met his gaze without blinking. "Captain," she said evenly, "I have no issue with verification. I do have an issue with displacement." The word was surgical. Displacement. The captain nodded slowly. "Understood." He turned to the attendant. "Confirm override tier." She handed him the tablet. He read. Once. Then again. The muscle in his cheek tightened almost imperceptibly. Richard watched the shift, subtle but undeniable. "What does it say?" he pressed. The captain looked up. "It says," he replied carefully, "that seat 2A cannot be reassigned without board-level authorization." A ripple moved through the cabin. Richard laughed again, thinner now. "Well, then get the board on the phone." Nia's phone buzzed a second time. This time she glanced down. "Deal suspension draft ready. Awaiting confirmation." She locked the screen. Looked up at Richard. "You may want to reconsider that request," she said softly. He stared at her, something new creeping behind his eyes. Not anger. Calculation. "You're bluffing," he said. Nia tilted her head slightly. "Mr. Halston," she said, voice calm as still water, "how much of this airline do you actually own?" The question hit harder than any accusation. The cabin went still again. Outside, runway lights blinked in steady sequence. Inside, power was no longer loud. It was shifting. Richard didn't answer her question. Not immediately. Instead, he adjusted his jacket again, a reflex, now not a statement. "Enough to know I don't answer to strangers," he said. Nia held his gaze. "You're right," she replied calmly. "You don't." A beat. "But you may want to know who does." The captain stepped slightly to the side, still holding the tablet. His posture had changed, not defensive, not aggressive. Alert. "Mr. Halston," he said carefully, "your listed equity tier is advisory class." The word advisory landed softly, but it stripped weight. Richard's eyes narrowed. And the captain continued, "Seat 2A override authority outranks advisory class." A murmur moved through the cabin like a ripple across glass. Richard turned sharply toward Nia. "Who exactly are you this time?" She didn't deflect. She stood.
Slowly.
Not dramatic. Not rushed. Just deliberate. The leather seat exhaled as she rose. Her blazer fell perfectly into place.
She didn't step toward him.
She didn't need to. "I'm the one finalizing the acquisition of this aircraft division tomorrow morning," she said evenly. Silence. The junior attendant's breath caught. Richard's face didn't collapse, not yet, but the certainty in it fractured. "That's impossible," he said. "That deal hasn't closed." "Correct," Nia replied. "It hasn't." Her phone buzzed again. She lifted it now, not hiding the screen. Legal clearance secured. Suspension ready for execution. She looked back up. "And it won't," she added quietly, "if this flight continues the way it started." The temperature in the cabin shifted, not emotionally, Financially, the captain straightened. Ma'am, are you implying I'm stating, Nia interrupted gently, that I will not finalize $1 billion acquisition with a company that cannot distinguish equity from assumption? Richard's throat moved as he swallowed. This is absurd, he snapped. You're threatening corporate leverage over a seat. Nia's expression didn't change. No, she said. I'm evaluating leadership culture. The words cut deeper than accusation. Behind Richard, two passengers who had been silent the entire time exchanged a glance. One of them quietly lowered his phone. Richard took a step closer, lowering his voice again. You think you can derail this entire transaction over a misunderstanding? Nia met him halfway with nothing but eye contact. You called it displacement, she reminded him softly. I call it data. The captain's tablet chimed again. A new internal alert flashed across the screen, pending acquisition status at risk. The captain's eyes widened. Richard saw it, and for the first time since he shouted, his confidence didn't recalibrate. It faltered. Outside the runway, clearance light switched from amber back to red. Inside cabin 2A, the departure had officially been paused. Not by air traffic control, by authority he had mistaken for absence. Richard felt it now. Not the loss of a seat. The loss of altitude. The captain's tablet was still in his hand screen, dimming and relighting with internal alerts. A quiet vibration pulsed through it again. Another update. The junior attendant leaned closer. Her eyes scanned, then froze. Captain, she whispered. He read the new lines slowly. Acquisition hold initiated by executive authority tier. Richard's voice cut in sharply. What does that mean? The captain didn't answer immediately. Because he already knew. Nia didn't move. She didn't even look at her phone this time. She had already pressed send. 15 seconds earlier, back in a glass-walled conference room in Manhattan, a legal team had watched the signal come through. And they executed it. Clean. Immediate. Irreversible, unless she said otherwise. It means, the captain said carefully, the acquisition process has been formally paused. Richard blinked, paused by whose silence. Then Nia spoke. By the person funding 72% of it, the number hit harder than any raised voice. 72, not symbolic, controlling. Richard's composure cracked, not loudly but visibly. His jaw shifted. His eyes recalculated. That's not public information, he said. No, Nia agreed. It isn't. The cabin felt smaller now. The luxury leather, the marble, the soft lighting, all of it suddenly fragile. Richard glanced at the other passengers, searching for support, for disbelief, for laughter. He found none. The junior attendant swallowed again. Sir, the hold order includes a review of executive conduct tied to this aircraft. Executive conduct. Richard understood that language. It meant documentation, internal review, recorded witness accounts. He turned back to Nia. You're destroying shareholder value over an argument? Nia finally stepped forward just one step, close enough that her voice didn't need to carry. I'm protecting it. A beat. From leadership that mistakes bias for authority. The words didn't echo. They settled. The captain straightened his posture. Mr. Halston, until further notice, departure is delayed pending executive clearance. Richard's phone buzzed. Once. Twice. He looked down. 3 missed calls. 1 from corporate strategy. 1 from legal. 1 from a number labeled board direct. His face changed. Color draining not from embarrassment but from realization. The power dynamic had inverted, and it had done so quietly. No shouting, no spectacle. Just one call. Nia stepped back toward her seat but did not sit. She adjusted her cuff once the same way Richard had earlier. Mr. Halston, she said evenly. Earlier, you said this cabin was tied to ownership. He said nothing. She continued. You were right. The runway lights outside flickered in sequence again, but the aircraft remained still. Because inside cabin 2, a ownership had just been clarified, and leverage had just changed hands. Richard didn't move. He couldn't. His phone kept vibrating in his hand, short, urgent bursts, the kind that don't stop until acknowledged. The cabin, once tense with confrontation, was now tense with consequence. Answer it, the captain said quietly. It wasn't a command. It was a suggestion. Richard looked at the screen again. Board direct incoming. He stepped aside, turning his back slightly to the cabin as he accepted the call. Yes, he said sharply, trying to recover tone. I'm aware there's been a... He stopped. Listened. His posture changed almost instantly. No, that's not what happened, he said. It was a seething confusion. Pause. His jaw tightened. I didn't know who she was. Longer pause. The cabin didn't need speaker mode to understand. Nia watched him without expression. Not triumphant. Observant. The junior attendant's tablet chimed again. Another internal alert. Executive conduct review initiated. Richard turned slowly back toward Nia, still on the call. His voice had lowered now. Yes, she's here. He glanced at her as if seeing her clearly for the first time. No.
She hasn't raised her voice.
Another pause. Then, I understand. He ended the call. The silence that followed was heavier than the shouting had been earlier. The captain stepped forward. Mr. Halston. Richard swallowed once before speaking. The board is requesting a formal statement regarding my conduct prior to departure. A murmur ran through the cabin again. The same passengers who had leaned away from conflict were now leaning into history. Nia finally sat back down, not as someone restored to position, but as someone who had never lost it. Captain, she said evenly, you may proceed with your standard protocol. I have no intention of delaying operations further. It was a gift. An out. The captain nodded slowly. Understood, ma'am. Richard stared at her. You're still closing the deal? He asked, disbelief creeping into his tone. Nia looked at him calmly. That depends on what he didn't ask. He already knew. Respect. Leadership. Pattern. Culture. The junior attendant took a small breath and stepped forward. Ma'am, your seat is secure. Nia gave her a slight nod. It always was. Outside runway clearance switched back to amber. Inside, something else had shifted permanently. Not policy. Not seating. Standards. Richard remained standing in the aisle, no longer towering, no longer pointing. Just another executive under review. Nia glanced down at her phone once more. A new message: hold reversible upon executive recommendation. She locked the screen. Looked up at Richard. You said this cabin was tied to ownership, she reminded him softly. He said nothing. She continued. Ownership begins with accountability. The engines began their low pre-departure hum again. But this time, no one mistook volume for power. The engines hummed steadily now. A low, controlled vibration beneath polished silence. Cabin 2 no longer felt like a battleground. It felt like a boardroom. Richard remained standing in the aisle, phone still in his hand, but no longer commanding space. His shoulders had lowered, not defeated, but recalibrating. The captain cleared his throat gently. Ma'am, he said to Nia, the board has requested direct confirmation of your position regarding the hold. Every eye in the cabin shifted toward her. Not out of suspicion. Out of recognition. Nia stood again, slowly, intentionally. The motion drew attention without demanding it. She adjusted her blazer, once the same gesture she'd made when she first sat down. Controlled symmetry. I don't believe in public humiliation, she said calmly. Richard's eyes flicked up.
A few passengers exchanged glances.
She continued, voice even measured, documentary calm. But I do believe in clarity. She turned slightly so both the captain and Richard were within her line of sight. Earlier, Mr. Halston, you said this cabin was reserved for investors. He swallowed. I also recall you saying you know who belongs here.
Silence pressed inward.
Nia took one step forward, not toward him, but into the center aisle. The access point. You attempted to remove the majority acquisition authority from her own aircraft. The sentence didn't rise. It dropped. Heavy. Final. A ripple passed through the cabin, not shock, but realization crystallizing in real time. Richard's composure fractured visibly now. I didn't know he said the words thinner than before. Nia tilted her head slightly. That's the point. The captain's tablet chimed again. Another internal alert executive conduct review escalated to governance committee. Richard saw it reflected in the captain's eyes. This wasn't about a seat anymore. It was about record, pattern, leadership. Nia turned back toward her seat, but didn't sit just yet. She looked at Richard one final time, not with anger, not with triumph. Assessment. You mistook silence for submission, she said softly. A beat. That's your last operational error. The phrase lingered. Viral. Cut clean enough to echo beyond the cabin. Richard lowered his gaze. Outside runway lights shifted from amber to green. Inside cabin 2A authority had already changed hands. And this time everyone knew who belonged. The shift didn't happen with applause. It happened with access. The captain's tablet lit up again, not with warning this time, but with execution. Temporary access, suspension, Richard Halston board travel privileges, under review. The junior attendant inhaled softly. Richard saw it. You're suspending my flight status? He asked, disbelief cracking through the last layer of composure. The captain answered carefully. Pending governance review, sir. Pending. That word used to protect him. Now it contained him. Nia remained standing in the aisle, hands loosely clasped in front of her. She hadn't requested suspension. She hadn't demanded removal.
She hadn't even raised her voice.
But systems move when authority moves. Richard's phone buzzed again. This time, he didn't answer. He didn't need to. He already knew what it meant. Across the cabin, one of the previously silent passengers leaned toward another and whispered, "This is corporate. Not drama. Corporate." The captain straightened. Mr. Halston, per instruction from governance, you'll need to relocate to 4C for this flight. The words were measured, neutral, but the inversion was absolute. 4C. Economy adjacent executive seating, not 2A, not the axis of power. Richard looked at Nia.
Searching for something mercy, perhaps.
She held his gaze. Calm. Unmoved. You called it displacement, she reminded him gently. The captain waited. So, did the cabin? After a long second, Richard stepped aside. Not escorted. Not forced. But repositioned. The aisle widened as he moved past her, no longer blocking, no longer pointing. Just walking. When he reached row 4, he paused briefly before sitting. The leather didn't exhale the way 2A had. The captain turned back to Nia. Ma'am, governance is awaiting your final recommendation regarding the acquisition hold. The cabin went still again. Every ear tuned. Every breath measured. Nia looked down at her phone. The message still glowed hold reversible upon executive recommendation. She lifted her eyes slowly, then addressed the captain but loud enough for the cabin. Proceed with departure. A beat. The hold will remain. The words didn't need volume. They carried weight. The junior attendant blinked. The captain nodded once. Understood. Runway clearance locked green. Engines deepened. As the aircraft began its steady taxi forward, one thing was clear: no one had been dragged out. No one had shouted. But in less than 30 minutes, $1 billion future had shifted because someone finally understood that power isn't proven by volume. It's proven by consequence. The aircraft lifted smoothly into the night. No turbulence. No applause. Just controlled ascent. Cabin lights dimmed to a warm glow as the city below dissolved into scattered constellations. Conversations resumed in low murmurs, but different now. Measured. Aware. Nia sat back into 2A as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. Her posture unchanged, her breathing even. The junior attendant approached carefully this time. "Ma'am, would you like anything before we reach cruising altitude?" Nia looked up at her. "Yes," she said gently. "A copy of your internal bias training completion rate for executive staff." The attendant blinked, then nodded quickly. Of course. It wasn't a threat. It was data. Across the aisle, a passenger quietly leaned toward another. "She didn't destroy him," he whispered. The reply came back just as softly. "She exposed him." Row 4 was silent. Richard stared ahead, hands folded tightly, phone face down on the tray table. His world had not collapsed, but it had recalibrated. And recalibration in corporate airspace is rarely comfortable. The captain's voice came over the intercom, composed as ever. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the earlier delay. We are now en route and expect an on-time arrival." A pause. Then subtly, "We appreciate your professionalism." The message wasn't for the passengers. It was for the cabin. For culture. For record. Nia's phone buzzed again. A new message from legal governance requests your statement for record. She typed just one sentence. Not long. Not emotional. Not performative. Leadership is revealed under pressure. Act accordingly. She hit send. Closed her phone. Outside the window, clouds drifted beneath them, soft, detached from the tension that had unfolded minutes earlier. Inside, one truth remained undeniable.
She hadn't shouted. She hadn't threatened. She hadn't leveraged spectacle.
She had leveraged standard. The junior attendant returned quietly with a tablet. "Ma'am," she said respectfully, "executive training completion rate is currently at 63%. Nia nodded once. "Let's make it 100. It wasn't revenge. It was reform. As the aircraft leveled at cruising altitude, the cabin finally settled into true calm. But everyone on board understood something they hadn't 30 minutes earlier. Power doesn't prove itself by taking a seat. It proves itself by redefining who decides who belongs in it. Cruising altitude. 37,000 feet above ground. But the real elevation had happened before takeoff. Cabin service resumed with quiet precision. Glassware placed gently. Linen straightened. Movements recalibrated. Not toward Nia. Toward standard. Row 4 remained still. Richard hadn't ordered a drink. Hadn't opened his laptop. Hadn't resumed the confident posture he boarded with. He was reading emails now. Carefully. Each one shorter than the last. Across the cabin, 2 senior executives seated near the rear exchanged looks. One of them subtly refreshed the company's internal dashboard on his phone. The acquisition hold had already triggered market speculation. Stock futures were reacting, not crashing. Reacting. Power doesn't always explode. Sometimes it adjusts valuation. The junior attendant returned once more to 2A. "Ma'am," she said quietly, "governance has scheduled an emergency session upon landing." "They've requested your attendance." Nia nodded. "I'll be there." The attendant hesitated, then added softly, "I'm sorry for earlier." Nia looked at her. "You weren't the problem," she replied. The words were not absolution. They were distinction. From the cockpit corridor, the captain stepped forward briefly. "Ma'am, on behalf of the flight crew, I want to acknowledge how this was handled." Nia held his gaze evenly. "Then handle the next one better," she said. "Not sharp. Not cold. Clear." He nodded once. Message received. Row 4 shifted slightly. Richard stood halfway as if considering something, then sat back down. He understood now. This wasn't about humiliation. It was about documentation. And documentation lasts longer than embarrassment. Nia opened her phone one final time. Another message from legal governance requests recommendation reinstate deal or withdraw permanently. She stared at it for a moment, not weighing ego, weighing impact. Outside the window, the sky was endless. Inside cabin 2, the decision would not be.
She typed 3 words.
Conditional reinstatement pending reform. Sent. Locked the screen. Leaned back. Because ownership isn't proven by removal. It's proven by what you choose to rebuild after exposure. And somewhere behind her in seat 4, see a man finally understood belonging is never assumed. It's earned. The aircraft began its gradual descent. Seatbelt signs flickered on with a soft chime. But the real landing had already been scheduled not on the runway but in a glass tower waiting below. Row 4 had not spoken in 20 minutes. Richard's screen glowed against the dimmed cabin light. Lines of text. Internal memos. Governance language stripped of emotion. Formal conduct review effective immediately. Board attendance privileges suspended pending vote. He exhaled slowly. Across the aisle, a passenger pretended not to look. In 2, Ania remained composed, reviewing a short summary forwarded from legal. Media containment stable internal audit initiated training reform proposal drafted efficient. Contained. Redirected. The captain's voice came over the intercom again, smooth and controlled. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing shortly. Thank you for your cooperation this evening. A pause. Then subtly, we value professionalism at every altitude. This time, it wasn't subtle. It was intentional. The cabin understood. As the aircraft lowered through clouds, city lights began to sharpen beneath them, grids of order beneath earlier chaos. The junior attendant approached 2A one final time before landing. "Ma'am," she said steady, "now governance has confirmed your attendance in the executive hangar upon arrival. Security will escort you directly." Nia nodded. "And Mr. Halston?" she asked calmly. The attendant hesitated. "He'll be escorted separately. Not punishment. Procedure." Row 4 stiffened slightly. Richard had heard. The plane touched down. Rubber met runway with controlled force, a reminder that even heavy things can land without exploding. As the aircraft taxied toward the private terminal, Nia stood. Passengers instinctively moved to give her space. Not out of fear. Out of recognition. Richard remained seated. For a moment, their eyes met across the aisle. He spoke first. "I misjudged you."
Simple.
Stripped of volume. Nia regarded him without hostility. "No," she said evenly. "You misjudged position. A beat. And culture." The seatbelt sign turned off. The cabin door opened. Cool night air slipped in. Security personnel waited at the base of the stairs, not dramatic, not armed. Corporate. Nia stepped into the aisle. No one clapped. No one needed to. Because everyone on board had witnessed something rarer than confrontation. They had witnessed recalibration in real time. And as she descended the stairs toward the waiting lights of the executive hangar, one truth followed her down the steps. Power doesn't prove itself in conflict. It proves itself in correction. The executive hangar was quiet. Not the quiet of emptiness. The quiet of consequence. Glass walls stretched high above polished concrete floors. A long table waited beneath suspended lights, not decorative but deliberate. Screens already active. Documents already loaded. Governance did not waste time. Nia walked in without entourage. No assistant flanking her. No attorney speaking first. Just her. At the far end of the table sat 7 board members, faces controlled, postures neutral. Among them, Two had already reviewed the incident footage pulled from cabin cameras. They didn't need narration. They had data. The chairwoman spoke first. Miss Carter, the acquisition hold remains active pending your final determination. Nia placed her phone face down on the table. I'm aware. A screen lit up behind them. Time-stamped footage. Richard's voice. GATO. DOFMYSEAT. Paused. Another clip. You people always mix up sections. Paused again. No commentary was added. It didn't need it. One of the board members adjusted his glasses. This reflects poorly on executive culture. It reflects accurately, Nia corrected calmly. A subtle shift around the table. Not defensive. Listening. The chairwoman folded her hands. Your recommendation. Nia didn't look at Richard, who had been escorted in moments earlier and now stood several feet away, no longer postured, no longer pointing. She looked at the board. You don't have a valuation problem, she said evenly. You have a standards problem. Silence settled in layers. She continued. Equity is measurable. Culture is not. But culture determines whether equity survives. Richard lowered his gaze. One board member leaned forward. And your condition for reinstatement. Nia slid a thin folder across the table. Inside, mandatory executive bias certification, 100% completion before voting rights restored. Independent review of advisory conduct. Public commitment to equity standards in all executive travel tiers. No theatrics. Structural correction. The chairwoman reviewed the pages, then looked up. You're not requesting removal. Nia met her eyes. I'm requesting reform. A pause. Then the chairwoman nodded once. Acquisition reinstated under conditions outlined. The words were formal, but the shift was seismic. Richard finally spoke, voice stripped of ego. I accept the review. Nia turned to him, not slowly, not dramatically. Directly. Leadership isn't proven in comfort, she said. It's proven when you're corrected. He held her gaze this time. No scoff. No deflection. Just understanding. Outside the hangar windows, the aircraft that had carried the confrontation now sat quiet under floodlights. A machine. Neutral. What had changed was not the plane. It was the precedent. As board members began signing the amended agreement, the chairwoman looked back at Nia. You handled this without escalation. Nia gathered her folder. I didn't raise my voice, she replied calmly. I raised the standard. The sentence landed without force, but it stayed. Richard stepped aside as she walked past him toward the exit. No hostility. No triumph. Just forward motion. And as the hangar doors opened to the cool night air, one final truth settled into record. She hadn't fought for a seat. She had redefined who decides who belongs in one. At 37,000 feet, ownership had been tested. On the ground, it had been clarified. And this time, no one would confuse silence for submission again.